You once wrote a column that described how whenever you had people of faith, or particularly Christians, on your show, you get tons of people writing in complaining about that.
That's one thing I really don't understand. As I say, I find sometimes faith hard to understand, but I also find that sort of militant atheism kind of hard to understand. Some people having faith, mainly exercising that faith through good works, doesn't seem to me that that's the chief problem we face.
This is Life and Faith, a podcast where we seek out conversations with people who believe in God and people who don't quite believe, but who still sense there's a worthy conversation to be had about life and faith. Welcome to Life and Faith from CPX. I'm Simon Smart. Richard Glover was the host of ABC Radio Sydney's Drive program for 26 years, retiring from that role at the end of 2024. He's the author of 18 books, including 3 for kids. He has a regular Saturday column at the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, which he's been doing for over 30 years. He started out as a cadet journo for the Herald and has been a foreign correspondent and news editor there. And in all of his work, whether it be on the radio, his weekly column, or the books he's written, there is an inquisitiveness about the world and other people, and a generosity of spirit and good humour. He really is a much-loved figure in especially Sydney's public life. We were thrilled to host him in the CPX studio to talk about his life and career, and as you'll hear, what makes ordinary life so special. Richard Glover, so great to have you in the studio. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
Now, I want to ask you to describe the main emotion you felt when, after 26 years of being a radio host, you turned off the mic and left the studio for the last time.
Oh, I think relief that I don't have to pretend an interest in who the new police commissioner is. No, look, I miss lots of things about it. I miss the audience, obviously, and I miss my colleagues a lot. And there's some really magic moments on radio, I think, which you can't get with print journalism. You can't get anywhere else, where you ask a question and something miraculous happens. A person rings in and knows exactly. You know, you don't have to search for months to find a person who can tell you about the experience of having a red-haired child who also is a space scientist. Should you wish to know that, you just ask and someone will
come up with it.
So there's great pleasures in that. But there is, a lot of intensity about it. So I did Drive on the ABC in Sydney for 26 years, same program.
Yeah.
Often with the same guests. Mm-hmm. Your friend Greg Sheridan, Pell, Jensen,
right.
Many people who've been on this podcast probably. And, and there was a great familiarity about the program and it had a very loyal listenership. All these things I appreciated. But it is nice to be free of just that amount of content, really. It was 15 hours a week with a very tiny tiny team.
Yeah, okay. So you're a bit of relief, but I bet there's some nostalgia as well.
I think I gave it a good crack.
Oh, you did? Yeah, you definitely did. I want to ask you about that audience relationship, though. It's an interesting one, isn't it? They feel like they know you. We feel like we know you. And we saw this recently with the terribly sad death of James Valentine, another much-loved host, and the outpouring of grief and celebration of that life. You are part of people's lives.
Well, it's the great intimacy of the medium, isn't it? And also the fact that people can ring in and tell you their own stories. So the most amazing thing at we had this celebration of James's life at the town hall.
Yes. And
one of the speakers, and this was James's idea before he died, was to have a listener represented. Mm. So Graham Long was there from the Wayside Chapel. There was Paul Kelly sang, Jimmy Barnes sang. There were all those things that you might expect, but then a listener was recruited. And once he got up on the stage, everyone realised she was clearly 9 months pregnant or 8 months pregnant or something like that. And that's how she finished her talk. She said, with the first child, one of the first things I did was ring up James and tell him about the birth of my first child. And one of the sadnesses of today is I won't be able to, in 2 weeks' time or when I have this child, I won't be able to tell James. Mm. And, he shared all the particularities of his life with the audience, and
Yeah.
they return the favour. And that's not a false thing, I think. With television, great respect for people who, do breakfast television or something like that. But a lot of it's written.
Yeah.
It has to be because of the kind of the technology that's involved. And we're crossing now to the Gold Coast. Now we're crossing to Melbourne. The Prime Minister's here. It has to be written by the producers. And I'm not saying there aren't moments of intimacy in that, but on local radio, whether it's commercial local radio or ABC local radio, there's no possibility of much being scripted. It has to be real.
Yeah.
It has to be your own voice and your own thoughts, and there's not much chance of a filter.
Yeah.
Even if you wanted one.
Yeah. Right.
And I think people who are sensible about radio know that that's the attraction, that no one wants a perfect friend, right? You understand that your friend is grumpy some of the time, is insightful some of the time, is kindly some of the time. That's a real person.
Yeah.
You don't need them to be perfect. So I never really minded if I lost my temper because I got corrected on my grammar.
Which happened once or twice.
I'd be happy to have less listeners, or do I mean fewer?
Yes. I once had a on-air argument with my wife on James Valentine's show. So she called up.
Here's what I live with.
Yes.
Was the segment.
She called up with this sort of bagging me out about it. She lives with this problem. And I then was given a right of reply. So we had this long conversation, which I think he quite enjoyed that. Yeah.
Simon, what was the problem?
The problem was that my wife has this terrible habit of using the washing up brush on oily, gravy-filled trays. And I used to say, no, you can't do that because it just wrecks the washing up brush.
Can't the washing up brush be washed?
This was exactly the debate.
What's it made out of? Gold thread.
This divided Sydney because I got a lot of support.
It did not divide Sydney.
I got a lot of support for this.
I cannot believe you got a lot of support.
I got a lot of support. I think I won the argument. I need to explain it more carefully. But we were happened to be staying with a friend, this older woman at the time, and she bought us 2 washing up brushes so we could sort of
marital harmony.
Make sure we didn't get divorced over this. But that was a good. That was
he
a
had
classic
one great one
his.
where he got a lot of people ringing in about perennial was the way you stack the dishwasher, right?
Yes.
And people say, my wife or my husband does it so poorly. Once they've gone to bed, I have to get out of bed and do it again. And James did his show a couple of times as a live event, and I remember going to see one at the Spiegel tent as part of the Sydney Festival.
Yeah.
And he and his wonderful producer Jennifer Fleming had hired and lugged onto stage a dishwasher and got people to fill it and not fill it. And then the question went out, is there anyone who wants to speak about how this is done? And there were 3 guys stood up and gave passionate speeches about how. And Jay, I mean, the other thing about radio is it's more about your ears than your mouth, right?
Yeah.
And he had very good ears. And after these 3 gentlemen made their impassioned speeches about their crazy wives and their matter, he said, I just wonder, what do you do for a job? And all 3 were engineers.
Well, I didn't have the same excuse, but yeah, it's great, isn't it? You mentioned these kind of magical moments you can get on radio. I have a memory of one on your program. So I was in the car, I was driving home. I got into the driveway as I got home, but I stayed sitting in the car listening to this. Don't know if you remember it, but you had an expert on, and an old man, really old guy, calls up, and he talked about his wife who had advanced dementia.
Oh, yeah.
And he says at one point, I still look at her blue eyes and I see the 16-year-old girl I first met.
I do remember it.
And I was like, oh, and everyone sort of gasped and we're trying not to choke up and this sort of thing. But these are the sorts of
the ultimate one.
They?
We did a segment for ages called Years of Your Life, I think it was called. And each week we'd select, each Friday I think it was, we'd select a particular year and people would ring up about all the things that, that might have been the year they got married, or it might have been the year of the birth of the first child, or it might have been the year one of them got breast cancer and then recovered from it. And sometimes people would respond to news events, and it was the year of the Granville train disaster, and someone rang up and said, I was the nurse that looked after the most seriously injured person of them all. Right. And she was in hospital for 8 months or something. And she said the other thing was we were both exactly the same age. We were both 26. And I looked after this woman for such a long time. And she said all the years later, I just wondered, we got her out of hospital, but how did she go? Did she manage to have children? Did she manage to go on to have a career? I just, she said, I've always just wondered about her.
Someone calls up.
What's going to happen next,
Wow.
And she rang in, and I have enough sense to turn off my microphone, and the two of them talk. And yes, she did have children, and she did go on to have a career.
Yeah.
Can't sort of have that experience in any other medium, really.
No. Yeah, that's the magic of it, isn't it?
I mean, not to diss podcasts.
No.
But I often feel if it happened in the other order, if podcasts were the first thing to be invented by, was it Garibaldi in 1930? Who invented radio? Something like that. But if podcasts came first, and then in the year 2000, someone invented this thing called radio. Yeah. And they said, what is it? What is this thing? I said, well, it's like a podcast, except it's live and people can ring in. But because it's live, you can also update people on the traffic. You can throw in the weather and people can contact you and give their opinions. I mean, it's kind of almost as good as podcasts, but so much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I do understand podcasts have their own attraction.
And they're every man his dog right now with the podcast. Do you have a favourite interview or two that stand out?
Look, I think everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses. I always thought I was kind of not that good at politics, really, to be honest. I'm probably too likely to see things from other people's point of view.
Right.
You've got to have a slightly...
a particular view yourself.
Well,
right?
Not even a particular view, actually. You've got to have that view of... what one British journalist put it there, why is that lying bastard lying to me?
Yeah.
That's got to be the attitude.
Right,
and so I didn't think I was that good at that. But I thought I was very good at reading a book, maybe a novel, maybe a non-fiction book, kind of understanding what the author was trying to do and then assisting them in kind of gutting that for a 20-minute radio interview. Yeah. And I think I did that pretty well.
Yeah. Did you have any terrible ones or that stand out? Like things, that was dreadful. Look, remember Michael Parkinson was once asked about that, and he said, I thought I would have liked Meg Ryan more than I did. This sort of stuff.
But I think if you're of a sympathetic turn of mind and you've done the work, I've had people who are famously difficult to interview. Lou Reed.
Right.
Pussycat.
Really?
Well, because, I don't mind to big myself up, but I'm polite.
Yeah.
and also really want the person to... I want my audience to enjoy that person and for them to be as amusing or insightful or whatever it is as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And that's my aim. Well, it's the thing, other people's aim is to trip people up or have something dramatic happen or... I just want them to be their best self.
Yeah, that was very much your style. So were there people like Lou Reed, say, very famous people, but that you met and you liked them even more than you did before?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I adore... this reveals me as the terrible Anglophile I am, but I adore Rick Stein. I adore Stephen Fry. I adore Bill Bryson. All these sort of people with a great kind of love of the language, I suppose, and ability to communicate. I could talk to them forever. Yeah.
Now, you're in the business of communication. You're not on radio anymore, but you continue to write books and columns each week for the Sydney Morning Herald. What's behind your drive to communicate?
I don't know. I've always, I've always done that since I was a kid. I had my first school newspaper when I was in year 5, maybe year 6 actually, which was promptly banned by the authorities. And you see, people sing the praise of the past, but let me tell you, it was a grim place. For instance, if you made a school newspaper today and gestetted it up and sold it for a cent a copy, they'd give you some sort of free atlas, maybe a product from the Bible Society. I don't know. But no, because I hadn't sought permission, I had to go to every... I was only 11 or something. Yeah. To go to every classroom, buy all the copies back, and then the school principal burnt them in front of me.
This is
fantastic.
Oh, that's an encouragement.
Fantastic. And then in high school, I had a few newspapers, and the best one was called Contention.
Yeah.
And it was edited by myself and my friend Arun, and it had big issues like capital punishment. Should it be banned? Co-education is the future, thing like that.
Right.
And we used to edit it at his place, and his father was a quite distinguished newspaper man, so he'd sort of overlook us as we were, typing up our copy and trying to type in little columns and putting the headlines in using, what was it called, that thing where you rub the letters off? I've forgotten now. And he'd say, a bit racy, that headline, boys, and things like that.
Right.
And meanwhile, his mother, of course, would cook these fantastic, amazing curries, and this is 1970s Australia. So I
never heard of
all
any
I'd
of
had
this.
every day of my life was incinerated lamb chops, and Deb mashed potato. And so I'd go to their house for maybe 3 days in a row doing this newspaper, and I'd stay there the night and curry for breakfast, curry for lunch, curry for dinner, and we would eat it with our hands as is traditional. Right. And his mother was very strict that Arun couldn't get anything past his first knuckle dirty.
Yes.
And yet I, as a non-Sri Lankan, would be allowed, the leeway of the second knuckle. I have a really sharp memory. This is nothing to do with your question, actually.
No, it's all right. It's good.
But it sort of goes to faith and identity, I suppose. One of my sharpest memories of being at Arun's place was she would get us to grind the spices for the food. And so we go out on the back step. And this is Canberra suburbs, either blazingly hot in summer or bitterly cold in winter. And then in both seasons, we'd go out, sit on the back step and grind away at these spices. And I remember once we came back inside and Arun's mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her face in her hands, just sobbing with all the tears coming out. And of course it was the sound. It was the sound of the spices and it just took her back to her homeland and all that she'd left and all that she'd gained and all those wonderful things. So anyway, we did that. I did that newspaper, and then following a few little missteps when I convinced myself I wanted to be a TV drama director or something like that, I joined the Herald as a cadet. I went to university and then I joined the Herald as a cadet, and found I just really loved writing, and I've never stopped.
Been
really.
with you
I've got a new book coming out in October, so soon.
No.
I'm doing all the final proofs, and
excellent,
quite fun.
I might ask you about that at the end. I feel like you're often trying to balance terrible news with good news. You're looking for the good stories, a sense of you'll be able to locate human decency. That's something I think characterises some of your work. What sort of motivation would you?
I feel very strongly about that. And journalism students, by and large, I think always, but maybe especially today, don't sort of see it that way.
No.
There's a famous George Orwell quote, which I don't know if they know the quote, but I'm sure they would agree with it, which is that the only worthwhile news story is a news story that someone doesn't want to see. Everything else is advertising, I think he said. Yeah. And I kind of get that to some, I'm a great admirer of Kate McClymont on the Sydney Morning Herald, great investigative reporter, and absolutely every story of her. If she ever rings you up, Simon, hang up. Just hang up
Run
quickly.
For cover.
But there is another way of looking at the task. And whether you're a newspaper editor or the editor of 7:30 on the television or running a radio program, is the task of leaving your listeners or viewers or readers with an accurate sense of reality. What about that? Instead of the George Orwell thing, what about that as an ambition? Yeah. So that at the end of the week, it can't be in every story or maybe even every day, but at the end of the week, people get the feeling deep in their bones that Sydney is a town with terrible problems, that there's corruption, there's criminal gangs, there's great inequality, domestic violence, all those other things. But that also, it's a city of great kindness and great love, and that's, sometimes what I think people dismiss as trivial talkback actually goes to finding that balance. There's nothing easier than doing bad news, really. Obviously at the Kate McClymont level, it's very difficult. But in terms of, there's a court case going on about these terrible people. The court reporter is here on the phone. The head of police is here because of this ram raiding thing. It's very easy as a journalist to organise these things. You can fill it up with no trouble, really. Yeah. But to find those other stories requires more creativity. Yeah. More effort. Yeah. So something that sounds like trivial talkback. Who's your kids? If your kids do soccer or netball, who's their coach? Are you their coach? Is someone else their coach? Tell us the story. Okay, very trivial talkback, it sounds like, doesn't it? And maybe you will get lots of funny calls from dads who came to baseball late and, tried to, and, a funny story about how badly they failed. But I remember once doing that talk back and someone rang up and talked about these two refugee boys who had no children of their own, recently arrived in the country, dedicated every Wednesday evening and Saturday to this team of 9-year-old kids because they loved soccer, they loved Australia, they wanted to give back.
Yeah.
Now, suddenly that's a story that makes you see Sydney in this different
light.
way.
Yeah.
And suddenly the sun bursts through the clouds. And I think that's a, really genuine need for journalism to try to give people an accurate sense of reality. Steven Pinker wrote that great book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I think it's called, and just talked about, when you look at the crime statistics, the actual crime statistics, in which crime basically around the Western world peaked in about 1990 and has been going down ever since. And then you look at people's perceptions of crime, which is ever rising, and you say, well, why is that so? Well, why it's so is because people are fed this diet, both in the mainstream media and even more in social media, actually, of negativity, in which you end up convinced that every house is being not even burgled. We don't call it burglary anymore or robbery. We call it home invasion because it sounds more dramatic. Yeah. And I agree, sometimes it probably warrants that term if it's 5 guys in a balaclava. But the most simple robbery is now a home invasion.
Yes. And so even more now, the need for the kind of thing that you're describing, where you're trying to give a balance. And it is a more accurate picture because there is a lot of kindness, compassion, good community, things happening that we can be
it lowers your blood pressure too. If you have an accurate sense of your city, it's better for you, I think.
I agree. Now, in 2 of your books, you write very movingly about a father figure who stepped into the gap in your life when your mum had left the family, your dad was away in England in a very depressed state, and Steve is a great name, came to the rescue.
Everybody in the 70s had names like that.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But what was it he gave you that was missing?
Well, I think, I had very strange, dysfunctional parents. There's a whole book about it, so I won't necessarily go into it. But
good book.
Yeah, it's a strange, distant mother and an odd sort of depressed father. And my mother left when I was about 14.
Under dubious circumstances.
She ran off with my English teacher from school, Simon, who she'd met at parent-teacher. And I always imagine the scene of, yes, Richard's doing very well with his Hamlet. Oh, hello. Anyway, so they sort of ran off together and he sort of built this Tolkien-inspired pleasure dome in Armidale where they indulged their love of The Hobbit and of nudism. I warn you particularly. I particularly warn you about chapter 6 of Flesh Wounds, which describes the scene. But my father got very depressed because I think he really did love her, and he got very depressed by this, and he kind of left. And this is not Angela's Ashes, right? Because it was a very nice middle class house in Canberra with a pool and a chest freezer, like every house in the 70s had a chest freezer in the garage, right? So I had plenty of supplies of food. I remember
you were 14, weren't you?
Yeah, I remember one of my friends from school came round, and they used to love this uninhabited, non-adult infested household, and one of them said, Richard never really left home. Home left him. Brutally accurate. Yeah. But this didn't last forever, and after about 2 or 3 months, my father had bought a news agency, and it turned out to be a really great investment. Canberra was booming. Whitlam had just become Prime Minister. Lots more money in the town, and he had an old friend. He'd been a journalist in Papua New Guinea, and his old colleague, Steve Stevens, was also searching around for something to do. And so my father said, you should find a news agency in Canberra. And so he did. And so suddenly, this is all from England, he's saying, you can go and stay in the house. So
with Richard.
Knock on the door. Yeah. And there's this sort of craggy-faced, sandy-haired, big lug of a man with this lopsided grin and very kind of masculine in a way, but also soul of a poet, one of those, hunting, shooting, fishing, yes, but also wrote poetry to his wife and all this sort of stuff. Amazing guy. And look, I think he was the first adult really in my life who really kind of listened to me and I don't say treated me with respect, just paid attention to me, really. I remember he used to offer to drive me, to town or to drama practice or whatever. And I'd say, hey, Steve, you can't do that. You can't, So it's all right. It's all right, And he'd insist, and he'd put me in the car and he'd drive. And I'd be complaining all the way. And he'd say, it's just turning a wheel, son. It's just turning a wheel. And when my kids were 13 or 14, and I'd sometimes drive their friends home, and they'd the more polite ones would thank me, I'd say, it's only turning a wheel, son. Which was my way of, I never told them the ghastly story about my mother leaving and the school teacher, but it was my way of sending a little nod of thanks to Steve.
I was really struck by that because I think there's this sense that young people need this in their lives, don't they? And lots of us can play that role if we're intentional about it.
Yeah. In the book, I call him the emergency dad, Later on, I got in terrible trouble. This is all in flesh wounds, but I got in terrible trouble in England as a young man, and it was really, awful. And he wrote me this long letter, which is in the book, and he'd taken himself from Canberra to Bateman's Bay or somewhere like that, booked himself into a caravan park and taken his old journo typewriter with him. One of those little Olivettis which punch a hole in the thin paper. And there's this long, long letter. And actually it was one of the few things in the book where the publisher said, you've reprinted a lot of this letter and none of it's really about the subject at hand. We think you should cut it back. And I said, no, you can't cut it. And it's true that the letter wasn't about the pickle I was in. It was just Steve raving on about the British and all the bones in the soil there and how terrible they were and how great they were. And in other words, his aim was just to amuse me, to distract me from my travails. And he'd put such a lot of effort into it. That was what was moving about it. Not the bit at the end where he says, I hope you're all right, But
brilliant.
The sort of 7 pages of
love.
Of love,
I think it's...
expressed through being mean about the British, which is the correct way to express love, is it not?
Right. Exactly right. Couldn't agree more. And very Australian form of love. No, it's lovely. And I think you gave this great picture of how even when some families let you down, other people can play a role.
Yeah,
It's great.
And I think it's really important to understand that, first of all, how common family dysfunction is.
Yes.
And secondly, how most of us find the love elsewhere. Not everybody does. Some people are so hurt by the process they can't recover.
Yes.
But lots of us. One of the things when I used to talk about flesh wounds in public, I sometimes would say to people, who feels that they got the love they deserved from their parents, the love that you'd want to give a child of your own. Not perfect, but something like the love. And I'm not saying everyone says we didn't. In fact, probably 60% of people say, you know what, they weren't perfect, but yeah. But that means 40% didn't.
Yeah.
And yet we're not all heroin addicts and we're not all robbing the local service station. And that's because we do find the love elsewhere. Now, sometimes we find it because someone like Steve Stevens comes to our rescue, like the cavalry, epaulets gleaming and all of that. And sometimes we find a good partner.
Yes.
Sometimes we find a priest. Sometimes we find a soccer coach, a teacher, friends. But we find the love elsewhere.
This is Life and Faith, and I'm speaking with journalist, radio host and author Richard Glover. We get to some fascinating areas in this second half of the interview, including questions of religion and faith and why that's always been a bit of a mystery to Richard. What does he find to nourish his soul? A part of his radio show that was something of an institution in Sydney was his Thank God It's Friday segment. It was the end of the week and early evening on a Friday as people were driving home. It had comedians and musicians that we all got to know and a very funny take on the events of the week just past. It all looked like huge fun. I had to ask him about that.
Yeah. No, it was great fun. That's the thing I miss most, really. And we did it as a live show quite a bit. Yeah. And we'd go to country towns or to the suburbs of Sydney and we always got a sort of enormously positive reaction. And Tommy Dean would create some fantastic joke about the local town.
Yeah.
Do you know Milton on the south coast of New South Wales? It's one of those towns which is divided by quite a busy highway. Yeah. And so Tommy just said, well, when you move here, I can't do his accent, American accent, but when you move here, you've got to just decide whether you're one side or the other because it's impossible to cross the road. So you shop, you live, you're either a norther or a south. you know.
It's cut in two.
And, you know, it was just a little observation. And but he would do that in every single town, just some really funny way of looking at the town. But again, I think it had a quite kindly quality to it. And, yeah, it was comedy and it was funny, but it involved a lot of storytelling and the comics often reflecting on their own lives rather than let's take Anthony Albanese apart.
Well, so comedy's such a big part of what you do and have done, and I think it's a key part of being human, actually. But your brand of comedy is, how would you describe that?
Well, I think it's taking, and this is the other thing, back to James Valentine. One of the things that he did very successfully, I think, is to treat normal, everyday life as if it's valuable, as if it's important, so that all those sort of tiny details of how we bring up children, or back to the, if you've got a terrible husband, for instance,
just carries on about the washing up, right?
About the washing up. That's worthy of honour and respect, because it's actually honouring life, really. Yeah. And not everything's about the interest rates. Some of it's about these little delicate dances we do with each other. I mean, James is the great example of this from James Valentine's show. Was he did this segment called Nothing, in which he'd come on the radio and say, well, today, normally we do, this is what I live with, or something like that. But I've got no ideas today. So I've got nothing. I've got absolutely nothing at all. I've got no question to ask, no game to play. But ring anyway. And amazingly,
that's risky.
And amazingly, they did,
and it worked.
And some people would say, "I've got nothing on today either. I'm a retired gentleman. I'm just here with nothing to do." Other people would say, "Oh, well, I'm a philosophy academic from Sydney University, and I'd like to discuss this idea of nothing." And often he'd just sort of lapse into silence. So much so that there's a thing on all radio stations where master control has a computer that breaks into the broadcast if there's more than 7 seconds of dead air.
Yes.
And, they start playing
My
Island Home or something. And so Bernie came down from Master Control and said, what's going on every Thursday at 2 o'clock?
We keep having to...
We keep on. And in the end, Bernie created this little CD which had a audio kind of buzz on it that was enough to fool the computer that something was going on. But you see, I think in the end, again, there'll be people listening to this podcast who will say, what a stupid idea, what a waste of time. Haven't they got something proper to discuss? But I think that's saying life is significant even when nothing's happening.
Yeah.
It's the life that's significant. It's these humans it's significant in itself.
Yeah.
It's not significant because we're talking about the war in Iran. It's not significant because we're analysing shit. It's significant in it. It matters in itself.
Yeah, I love that. Trump Tuesday was an interesting one.
Yeah.
Where you would have experts observe and comment on the strangeness of American political week.
And we kept on thinking it would run out of steam, but my God, it never did. Yeah. Dr. David Smith, who was terrific.
Very good. We've had him on here actually as well.
Terrific.
Can I ask you, what's your reaction to that strangeness of how things...
Yeah, I just think it's unbelievable. We're recording this after they just had the
UFC,
the cage fight thing, and in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And look, I think, and I know the poll figures are terrible, but I do keep on looking at the poll figures and think, well, who's still with him? But, the bigger picture is, I do understand the bigger picture, I hope, which is that, and this is One Nation too, is that there is this great frustration with normal politics.
Yeah.
And obviously some of it, both in Australia and in America, is racial and represents lots of things that most of us would find abhorrent. That it's also true that a lot of it's not about that at all. A lot of it's simply about going to the petrol station and thinking, it's $120 to fill up my car? How can that be? And, the truth is that living standards in Australia have gone down for quite a few years in a row. And it's when that happens, it is difficult for people not to be angry, and then being angry and frustrated, then want to blow up the system.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening. How we recover from that, both in America and here, I don't know. I mean, some of it is this extra thing of social media.
Yes.
I mean, one of the columns I wrote recently is, because the whole e-world has been coming for a while. So I've written about this occasionally, from whether it's the rise of AI now or social media. I've always felt the need to say, oh, well, we all understand some things are terrific, don't we? But I must point out this small problem. And that was almost the necessity. Otherwise, you were labelled as this sort of terrible Luddite.
Yes.
And I kind of, in more recent months, I've been thinking, is there anything that good? because even things, I mean, I use the Apple Map today to come to you, and even things like that, you're actually de-skilling yourself. You're losing something as well as gaining something. And really, would it have been hard to find North Sydney without it? And certainly, the idea that you can find all the information on the internet, especially now it's been totally taken over. So even the simplest Google search brings this AI response, which is full of hallucinations and total rubbish. And I mean, there's been a little controversy in Sydney over this piece of writing by the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Western Sydney University, where she argued for the virtues of kids going to uni still. And said, don't let AI put you off and things like that. We're still, the kids are still learning. The piece, she later admitted, was written by AI. I mean, she put in the arguments and all that, but then she defended herself in this most dismissive way about writing. She said, well, why I put in the arguments and I've thought up all the ideas. Why would I be bothered? I'm paraphrasing him, but why would I be bothered constructing sentences from scratch? As if the act of writing was the most sort of menial bit of,
So that should concern us, I think.
Well, the process of writing is the process of thinking. Yeah. They're not separate. Dickens doesn't come up with Oliver Twist walking along the beach, does he? He might have a few thoughts walking along
but he then has to sit down.
But it's the process of writing in which you discover what your ideas are and discover the world that you want to create. And it's this idea that this is one of the most beautiful things about human beings. Dave Eggers said something like this recently, the American writer. One of the most beautiful things about human beings is that, so this sounds trite, but we are all unique. And we're this absolute collection of the experiences that we've had and the genes that came to us through our parents and the languages we speak and the programs we watch and the books we read. No one is like you. Yeah. And so when you write the most, I think as Dave Eggers put it, your most rambling first draft is much more valuable than anything AI could do because it's yours. Yeah. And he says the human choir needs every voice.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, and I just, so I don't think anymore we need to say, we know, we're so lucky to have. We're not. It's all rubbish. Yeah. We were better off before it.
Now, Richard, when we asked you to come on this show, you were very keen to say, look, I'm not someone of faith. I don't have a kind of wisdom to share on that. And sure, we understand that. I want to ask you a question that another podcaster always asks her guests first up, and it's, what is sacred to you? Is that something?
Yeah, I think, I'm a great respecter of people of faith. I've never quite achieved it myself. But I think that may be partly because I have a faith-shaped hole which I've filled with literature. I am absolutely nuts about reading, and I'm nuts about writing as well. And in a way, that's my act of devotion. So my act of devotion is, being halfway through Proust or something like that, and I think
devotional reading.
I think it does fill the same sort of place in my heart that faith does for other people. Yeah.
Is it? A lot of writing, I think, especially a lot of literature, is sort of edging towards or speaking to this question of what it is to be human. These are kind of theological questions in a way.
Yeah, it's also, it's a trapdoor into not being yourself. I mean, that's the other thing, is it allows you to
live other lives.
Yeah, that's right, and to leave yourself behind and become, so you're no longer on the train to Bankstown. You're in the steppes of Russia with Anna Karenina, aren't you? Or you're in Melbourne with some criminals, or you're in whatever the book you kind of like to read is. Yeah. You're suddenly there. So it's a great, the other thing that maybe is a bit similar to religion is that, I think literature is a real gymnasium of empathy because it invites you to so totally see the world through someone else. I mean, I mentioned Anna Karenina. It's a really good example, actually, because she's not that attractive a person, really. No. She's totally different from us. She's an aristocrat from the 19th century and all that, but she's also not particularly a great person, and yet, we still feel so deeply for her. Yeah. So Tolstoy manages to say to you, even though you're nothing like this. This person's totally different from you. I'm going to make you feel deeply, deeply anguished for her. And he does.
Yeah.
There's a scene in that book where, she's run off with Vronsky and she's taken her boy, who I think he might be 11 or 12 years old, with her. And after a while, after a few months, the father writes to her and says, you must send the boy back. And she's heartbroken by this idea. And so she thinks, I should let my feelings tumble out with Vronsky. Yeah. And as soon as she has that thought, she instinctively understands the dismissive look that will come across her lover's face should she do it.
Yeah, that's not what he's into.
And in that moment, we realise that she realises the whole thing's been a disaster and Vronsky doesn't really love her and she's given up an awful lot for nothing. And it's impossible not to feel this wave of human sympathy. And that's a transformative thing. I mean, back to Steven Pinker, one of the things he argues is that all sorts of violence has been on the decline since about the 14th century, actually. Even the famously terrible 20th century of war, it's actually, you can sort of plot a decline in violence. His claim is it's partly the invention of the printing press and that reading becomes a much more widespread thing. Because, I mean, to brutally summarise a 400-page book, the argument basically is that once you've read a imaginatively reconstructed account of a witch being burnt at the stake, the cries, the smoke, the terror. Once you've read that, it's hard over time to remain part of a society that does that.
You once wrote a column that described how whenever you had people of faith, or particularly Christians, on your show, you get tons of people writing and complaining about that. What's your sense of the perception of Christians in the public square and how has that changed in your lifetime?
Yeah, well, I just think that's one thing I really don't understand. As I say, I find sometimes faith hard to understand, but I also find that sort of militant atheism, Richard Dawkins style, kind of hard to understand. I don't. If you don't believe something's real, then why are you so exercised?
Spend your life.
Especially, I suppose. Now, I understand that there have been times in human history, and there are places in the world at the moment where faith has been a very negative force. Of course, I understand that. But at the moment in our lives, it doesn't seem to me that that's the chief problem we face. Some people having faith and mainly exercising that faith through good works doesn't seem the main issue the world faces in an era of unrestrained consumer capitalism, of total dominance by billionaires, of existential threats from AI and global warming.
Your local church is probably not that.
I don't get it. But yes, that would always happen because I mean, again, this sounds corny, but I do believe that a lot of different voices is good for radio. It makes it for a more interesting conversation. I hate only reading columnists that I agree with. I think that's, and I used to love, whether it was Jensen or Pell or one of the, and often it was a really stimulating thought because a lot of the time the left-wing people say left-wing things and the right-wing people say right-wing things and you think, okay, well, I know exactly what they're going to say. But often with Christians, you'd get this mix of what would normally be considered right-wing and left-wing. So, Jensen might be incredibly pro-refugee because every human being is God's child, but also, in my mind, terribly conservative and reactionary when it came to homosexuality.
Right.
That's stimulating, isn't it?
Yes, that is interesting. I love that your description of that, of how it sort of messes with the categories at least. It should, I think. I think people of faith should do that. Now you've read all of Greg Sheridan's books on God and Christianity.
I have.
And you joked with me at one point that you said your wife was concerned when you got to page 150 that you might turn. That didn't happen. But were there any aspects of what Greg covered, for instance, that might have made you wonder?
Yeah, I think, I think it's the second book is a wonderful really retelling of the Jesus story. Now, I know this, you think, well, Richard, you must know the Jesus story. You've been brought up in this culture. You spent a long time at Sunday school. Right. Surely you know the Jesus. Of course, I do know the Jesus story, but there is something about when you sit with it for a few hundred pages and you start to really understand the power of that story and you understand why it changed the world, actually. I think the other moment, I suppose, is that moment where you think about how unlikely it is that Earth is here.
Right.
The incredible precision of the amount of oxygen, the amount of sunlight, the position in space, the distance from the sun, and almost any single one of those being slightly different to a degree, or well, maybe not a degree or two, but not much at all. Suddenly evolution would not have occurred and we would not be here, or it might have gone for a while and then we'd have been destroyed. So when you think about the sort of unlikeliness of existence, I think that's the moment when even a non-believer says, hang on a moment. But you haven't got me yet, Simon, because I've still got Proust.
Yes, well, we'll get there eventually. Now, your next book is How to Ruin a Child.
Yes.
A journey into the alarming, hilarious and ever-changing advice given to Australian parents. You're a grandparent now too.
Yeah.
Did that sort of spur you into this
I guess
subject?
I guess it did, but it also it did strike me that we've all been parented, right?
Yeah.
And some of us have been parents, and a few of us get to be grandparents. So this is one of the things that makes us, really, that forms us as human beings, is the way we were parented. And yet there are different parenting styles, and they have been changed a lot in the last century and a quarter. And just to think about all the ways in which they've changed, the kind of brutality with which the so-called experts were convinced that their way was the only way. The immense human, sorry, it's quite a funny book, but the immense human misery of decades in which, mothers were told, fathers were told they weren't allowed to comfort a crying child, that this would destroy their character, that they must feed on demand every 4 hours, with the babies, and that any deviation, even for a few minutes, would ruin the child again. Yeah. The toilet training must be begun in the first week. This is very commonly said. And, the history, once you get into this stuff, oral history is full of accounts of, mothers sitting, bawling their eyes out at 5 minutes to 6, whilst their baby bawled her eyes out behind a closed door, right, because she felt she
wasn't meant to.
And it was all rubbish. In fact, as the Nursing Mothers Association said, actually it led to a decline in breastfeeding rates because the mother's response to a crying child is part of what develops the breast milk.
Right.
So there's all this kind of misery to explore, I suppose. And I think what's pleasing about the book is that, that all went away maybe it took a bit longer here, but in the 70s and 80s it got replaced by a much more child-centred, so-called responsive parenting. But then there's been lots of backlashes since. Yeah. I saw something today, actually. We've got to get stricter. And what's interesting, I think, is that once you see all these new things through the lens of the past, you realise that a lot of these ideas have been tried before. Yeah. And they've failed. And they don't make parenting easier. They actually make it more difficult. And so you also realise that most good parenting happens in this quite wide laneway between these rigid ideas. And there's a lot of people in this business still who basically create straw men. That great argument, this great debater's trick to pick the other side as having some ridiculous view, and then you demolish it. And parenting guides are full of that, right, and they kind of still are. Everybody's letting their children run wild, or no one's letting their children run wild enough. Yeah. You're all cotton wooling your children, and the truth is, and I've been a parent, I've been a grandparent, I've seen this up close, and my observation is that very few people are parenting in this extreme way. I've been part of a million discussions in my life about the kids want to go to George Street to the cinemas this weekend on their own. What do you think? Well, how old exactly are they? Is it this end of George Street or the other end of George Street? Yeah. Has one of the party been on that bus before and knows the way back? Okay, what do you think? And I'm not saying we always made exactly the right decision, but we weren't insane.
No, and you were thinking carefully.
We were thinking carefully. And right, so parents are always, you realise they've been demonised since 1900. And let's give them a break and understand that most of them do a really good job, actually.
That sounds great.
And raise fine human beings.
Well, very important. And Richard, great admirer of your work, and it's been so wonderful.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
This has been Life and Faith with me, Simon Smart. Thanks so much to Richard Glover for taking time to come into the CPX studio and chat with us. You can find Richard's work at his website, richardglover.com.au, and in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age in Melbourne on a Saturday. His most recent book is Best Wishes, Making the World a Better, Less Annoying Place, One Wish at a Time. And his upcoming book, out later this year, is How to Ruin a Child, a journey into the alarming, hilarious and ever-changing advice given to Australian parents. We'll put all of that in the show notes. Next time
One of the amazing things about winemaking is seeing something that is such an accessible raw product. Everybody's familiar with eating grapes, seeing those fairly straightforward flavors being completely transformed by this natural process of fermentation into something that is complicated and complex and so rewarding to enjoy.